We'll get started in just a second. Make sure everything is working properly before we dive in. Hope everyone's having a good day. Just want to make sure this is still going. I hope we didn't lose any sound there momentarily. Make sure this is going. Sounds all right over there. Make sure. Including credentials. Credentials are cookies, TLS client certificates, or authentication headers containing the username and password. To control whether or not the browser sends credentials, as well as whether the browser respects any set cookie response header, set the credential option, which can take one of the following three values: omit, same origin, or include. Note that if the cookie same site attribute is set to strict or lax, then the cookie will not be sent cross-site, even if credentials is set to include. So interesting to know. You shouldn't have to worry about this with most projects that you'll build unless you're using vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and deploying it to the web. Not very likely that you'll do that, but there are some cases that you can if you just want to build a simple static website. It may make sense just to do that. So in that event, and if you're going to include authentication or need to send some form of cookie data, I would highly recommend leveraging the documentation, regardless of the fetch method or the way that you want to get your API data, but certainly if you're using fetch. Oh, sorry about that. We're about ready to jump in. So we should be about here. Okay. Creating a request object. The request constructor takes the same arguments as fetch itself. This means that instead of passing options in the fetch, you can pass the same options to the request constructor and then pass the object to fetch. For example, we can make a post request by passing options into fetch using code like this. And this is basically accessing or calling the headers with the keyword new in front of it. It's assigned to a constant named myHeaders. Using the append method, pass it in the content type, and that content type is application/JSON. And then for the response, we'll await fetch. This is the URL where we'll be making the post request to. The method is post, and the body, we're going to stringify the data with the key is the username, and the value we're getting back is example as the header, meaning that we're sending this over the server, and this is the format that we're sending it in. However, we could rewrite this to pass the same arguments to the request constructor. This is just a longer way to do the exact same thing that we just done. Certainly would recommend the first approach, but either approach works. This also means that you can create a request from another request while changing some of its properties using the second argument. Okay, and this is just a much lengthier approach, just going over different ways that you can go about it. To make canceling a request. To make a request cancelable, create an abort controller and assign its abort signal to the request signal property. Here's just how you go about doing that. I think handling the response. As soon as the browser has received the response status and the headers from the server, and potentially before the response body itself has been received, the promise returned by fetch is fulfilled with the request object. And here you can check the response status. The promise returned by fetch will reject on some errors, such as network error or bad scheme. However, if the server responds with the error like 404, then fetch fulfills with the response. So we have to check the status before we can read the response body. This is typically a best practice in just about every approach that you want to take as it relates to making a request to get data or trying to do something. You always want to care for errors. In the event that you don't get something or there is an issue, you can send it back to the user if it is something on the user's end, and if it is something on your end or the server end, then you can identify and debug what exactly is causing the issue in effort to fix it so that you don't have it going forward, or so that you can display or capture any data that you're looking to capture. Copy of OK and throw if it is false. So this is what we've seen earlier. If the response is not OK, then we're going to throw an error and provide back that status. Okay, sorry about that. Checking the response type. Responses have a type property that can be one of the following: basic, cores, opaque, opaque direct. The type determines the possible contents, of the response as follows: basic response, exclude response from headers; cores response, included only response from headers from cores; safe listed response header list. Opaque responses are opaque. Redirect responses have a status of 0 and an empty header list and null body. And you also have the ability to check the header. So there's a lot that you can do with this API, and a lot of information that you can get depending upon your project and your project's need. I certainly would recommend spending some time reviewing this if you're not familiar with the Fetch API and how it works, especially if you're going to add it into one of your projects in the upcoming future. But this was a pretty in-depth explanation of Fetch. Really gave some good insight into how it works. It's very simple, and if we needed to customize it or do anything any further, you have quite a bit of flexibility in order to do so. But for our project today, we're going to have a basic usage of it. Nothing too strenuous or too complicated that we're going to be doing. Just looking to fetch some data or utilize the Fetch API that we just learned, fetch some data, display it as a user card on screen. And then the hope is, if you're following along, is that you'll leverage this to do something else, or to add on to it, or to expand in your project. And if nothing else, you'll learn how to use the Fetch API, get some dynamic data, and display it on screen to the users. So We'll work on that in just a moment. So let's go ahead and get started with building out the project. So we'll go ahead and create a directory inside of our VS Code, and we have a folder that's located on the desktop. I'm going to name this one Fetch Project, Fetch User. Sorry. We'll start with a index.html file. I'll go ahead and add a style.css and also a main.js. The index.html will be the HTML file that'll basically be the backbone or the structure, I should say, of the project. Style.css is going to be our global style sheet that's going to hold all of the styles for the user cards that we're creating. And then last but not least, the main.js is going to be the file that we'll use to capture the user, that create some interaction and also fetch the user data. So I'm going to adjust my window so that we can see the code and the updates as we type it. Do this. There we go. And all right, so I'm going to go ahead and get a HTML document on screen. I'm going to name this Fetch User API. Hello world. And then we'll use live server from VS Code to open up the project. And I'm just going to move this into Chrome. Okay. And just like that, we have a HTML document up in our local environment. Right now, we're just displaying Hello World on screen. As you can see, I updated the title. So the title now reads Fetch User API, which is mirroring what we have in the HTML document. Inside of the body, we're displaying Hello World. And as you can see, that's Hello World on screen. We do have some margin and padding by default that comes standard with the HTML document. So to make sure that we're going to go ahead and connect the style sheet right now, and then we'll come back and connect the JavaScript. But let's just make sure that the style sheet is working. And the way that we'll connect it, first we'll need to add a link, and we'll give it a self-closing tag. The rel for the link tag will be style sheet. And the href for it will be style.css. Let me see something here. You know what? I may actually try something. All right, so we have hello world on screen. Sorry about that. So we should be good with, and we've attempted to connect the style sheet to this HTML document. So just to make sure that it works, what I'm going to attempt to do is remove this default margin that's on the page. And if it updates, then we know that we're connected. Otherwise, I did something wrong. So let's check it out now. We'll start with the asterisk, which is going to target everything within the HTML DOM, or within the DOM, excuse me. We'll say padding of 0. We'll set the margin to 0. And as you can see on screen, it has updated. So there's no more margin left at this point. And we'll set the box sizing to border box. Okay. So that should care for our HTML, or excuse me, for the default styling, and just making sure that the CSS is connected. So what we'll do now is work on the main portion of the project, which is going to be creating a user profile and using the Fetch API, or using Fetch in order to communicate with our API. So inside of the body, we'll go ahead and remove hello world for right now, and we'll add the main HTML tag, and let's add a H1 header or a title, and we'll give the title the name of user profile. We'll say user profiles. Click save, and you can see that updated on screen. Then we'll add a section, which will have a closing tag, and we actually don't need to pass anything within it. Only thing we're going to give the section is a ID of user list. What we'll be doing with this is dynamically fetching the user information and displaying it on screen. And the reason we gave the ID, or excuse me, gave the section a unique ID, is because we want a unique way to identify this section list so that we can interact with it, display the data dynamically and not hard-coded within our HTML. And the last thing we'll need to do within our HTML before we'll close this out is add in our JavaScript. And the way that you do that is by using the script tag. And with the script tag, we'll give it a src of main.js. This main.js is going to correspond to the name of our JavaScript file. As mentioned previously, we've named it main. So that concludes the HTML. Now we'll move on to our JavaScript. Since we don't have anything on screen, I won't worry about styling it just yet. So we'll focus on the JavaScript, which is going to allow us to use the Fetch API to capture the data. So the first thing we'll need to do is gain access to that to the user list ID within the section tag. So we'll create a const named user list and set it equal to document.getElement by ID. And we're just going to pass in user list. And we'll just make sure that I spelled it correctly. Yeah, should be good. Let's make sure. Just want to make sure. Perfect. Next, we'll create per the documentation. Actually, that's right here. Per the documentation, the next thing we want to do is create an asynchronous function, but we can follow the docs to the T on this one. Following this exact same format just to get the data. So we'll say async function. I'm going to name this function get user. We'll make it plural because it's more than one user. And then inside of the curly braces, we'll start with the try catch block. Now, per the docs, you can store this variable outside of the try catch. I'm just going to place it within it. It really doesn't matter as long as it is there and you are storing it in a variable. You can store it directly if you want, but I'm just going to store it within the variable. So the variable name that we're going to store the URL and the fetch request in, I'm just going to name it res for response. And remember, we have to use await and then the keyword fetch. Actually, you know what? I'll just follow the documentation approach. We'll go const res. It's going to be equal to, for this, I'm going to reach out or use the JSON placeholder data. And I believe that is JSON, HTTPS JSON placeholder.com. No, it is dot type, type, ICE, com/users. Let me just make sure that this actually does exist. If this isn't it, then we can find one on Google. Yeah, it's it. So this is the URL of where this is where we're making our API call to, if you will. And then inside of the try portion, that's where we want to make our fetch request. So we'll say const, we'll say, actually, you know what? Let me change this to URL. We'll make this response. And this is going to be equal to await fetch. And what we'll be fetching is the URL that we just passed in. Now I'm gonna pass on that. Thank you, Doug. All right, and then we'll say if the response is not okay, then we will throw new error and pass in temporal literals response status $, curly braces, response dot status. Otherwise, all goes well. We'll say const users is equal to res dot JSON, and this should be awaited, sorry, because we'll need to make the request and wait to get a response back. And then underneath that, we know that we'll have multiple users, so we'll just go ahead and map over so we can display them. We'll say users.map, and then we'll pass in user, which is going to represent each user within the API because we're fetching all users. We're not specifying which users we want to grab. Then inside of the const, or excuse me, inside of the map, we'll add const and do a little bit of destructuring. What I want to grab is the name, email, and I think website. Let me just make sure. Let me make sure that that is what it renders. Name, email, oh, and then website. Okay. Yep. And then we'll set that equal to the user. This is destructuring live and in living color. Okay. Then we'll create a const. This is going to represent the card. And remember, we're dynamically passing this inside of the HTML document. So we'll need to create the actual card because all we identified was a list. So we'll say the card is equal to document.create element. And what we want to create to store our card or hold the card, organize it, is a div. Then we'll add a card. Well, then we want to give the card a class list, and we want to add a class of user card. What we're going to do is use this user card to style it. That's basically what we're doing. The meat and potatoes, or the main thing that you wanted to care for with this, is make sure that you were destructuring whatever information you want to get from that user object. And in this case, we're getting the name, email, and website. Then we want to display that data. We're not just going to log it to the console. So since we're displaying it, we're creating a div. And we're storing it within a variable named card. And then we're giving that card a class list so that we can give it a class name of user card. And then to display something on screen, we're just going to go card.enter HTML. I'm not going to worry too much about the styling so much just yet. I'm just going to make sure that we can capture at least the information and display it up front. We can make it prettier later. So we're using temporal literals because we want to dynamically pass in information. And for right now, I'm just going to worry about displaying the name. I'm not going to worry about anything else just yet. And then underneath this inner HTML, what we want to show on screen, the username, I'm going to go user list dot append child so that we can add the user card to the list, or add it to the bottom of the, or add it to the bottom of the list, excuse me. And then in the catch portion, in the event we get an error, we'll say user list .html, meaning that we want to, or inner HTML, meaning that we want to display that error inside of the user list. And we'll just set it equal to a p tag because that's what we want to display. And we'll just say failed to load users. And then the last thing we'll want to do is with the function is we have to have a way to actually call it. And the way we'll call it is by saying fetch, what's the name of this? No, it is get users. We'll just call the function get users. Sorry about that. And as you can see, we're getting a error message back because we are not able to capture the user. So let's just take a look at it. Users.map. Let's see, that's the response. Rest.body. Let's go console.log users. Error connected close. Let's see if we can get a log of this error. We'll just go error, save it. Error, reference error response is not defined. So we have not defined that response. Let me see here. Sorry about that. All right, error reference error response. It's not defined. So let's see, where do we have that? Actually, we can remove this. And there we go. So we see that it actually is hitting the console right here. Here are the user objects. It's just not loading on screen, and it is because user is not irritable, meaning that we can't loop through this. So let me see. I'll need to see something here so we can iterate this list. Think about this for a second. How do I want to go about it? Let me see. It's saying we can't iterate this user, but we should be able to. I may need to change this method. So it is getting the URL, await fetch, no problem there. Users.map. And we're destructuring. How do we want to iterate this? Let's see. Yeah, I gotta think about this one for a second because it should be able to iterate through an object. I don't see anything wrong with it, and it's destructuring the user. And let me see, I must be tripping. That's correct. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not. It's common to run into it. The big thing is to know how to troubleshoot, if you will. Um, I'm just going to tell you what, instead of using map, let me try for each. Nope, it's still not letting me iterate that user. I tell you what, let me try. I'll just do this differently. Why don't we go? I'm just going to try it this way. We'll say const res is equal to await fetch, and we're going to fetch this data. Then we'll say const users is equal to await res.json. And then we'll say users dot for each of the users, we're going to name them user. Then we'll pass in the const to destructure from the user object. And I'm just going to grab the name. Then we'll say const card is equal to document.create elements, and we'll be creating a div. Then we'll add a card. This one is a class list add, and we're just going to be adding the user card. And then just to get something on screen, I'm going to go card.enter HTML. With this, I just want to dynamically pass in a H2. This is going to represent the name. And from there, after this, we're just going to go user list dot append child, and we're going to pass in the card. And there we go. So it looks like the reason is because I was attempting to make this request outside of the try catch, and it was given an error. But basically what we've done is we've used the fetch API to fetch the users from this dummy JSON data. And you can see the name of Leanne Graham. We have Leanne Graham, Irvin Howell, Clement Bunch, Irvin Howell, Clement Bunch. So there, it works. I'm not going to worry about the styling on it tonight, but I hope you learned something and got a little bit from this. If you did, feel free to drop a comment what you learned. And sorry about the error message. I attempted to try a different approach to capture it, thinking I could store it in a variable, but I think it's because of how I captured the data and I didn't turn it into JSON before I did the mapping. That was the reason it said it couldn't iterate that object, but it's all good. Now we know. But I hope you enjoyed today's quick tutorial and walkthrough of the Fetch API, how to leverage it in JavaScript to fetch data. And this could easily be replaced with actual real user data. But right now we're just using the dummy data from placeholder. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see in the future. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out for the night, and I'll see you tomorrow.